这是我今年给身边朋友推荐最多的一本书，叫做《4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals》，作者是 伯克曼的。我想和大家分享里面我最爱的一章，叫做 Cosmic Insignificance Therapy。我当时买这本书就是因为在一个播客里听到了作者朗读这一章，当时就非常惊讶，听完后有了那种很罕见的平静感，而且这种平静感持续了很长时间。那这本书是去年出版的，还没有中译本，所以我想读给大家听我想大家可以收藏起来。每当你开始怀疑自己正在做的事情的意义，或者是不是在浪费自己的人生，觉得自己还不够优秀，不够努力，还没有满足现代社会对成功的这种定义时，就可以翻出来听一听，希望能够给大家带来安慰和解脱。What you do with your life doesn't matter all that much. When it comes to how you're using your finite time, the universe absolutely could not care less. The late British philosopher Brian McGee liked to make the following resting point. Human civilization is about 6,000 years old, and we're in the habit of thinking of this as a staggeringly long time. But now consider the matter a different way. In every generation, there were always at least a few people who lived to the age of 100.It's possible to visualize a chain of centenarian lifespans, stretching all the way back through history with no spaces in between them. By this measure, the golden age of the Egyptian pharaohs, an era that strikes most of us as impossibly remote from our own, took place a scant 35 lifetimes ago. Jesus was born about 20 lifetimes ago. And the Renaissance happened 7 lifetimes back. A paltry 5 centenarian lifetimes ago, Henry VIII sat on the English throne. 5.From this perspective, human history hasn't unfolded glacially, but in the blink of an eye. And it follows, of course, that your own life will have been a minuscule little flicker of near nothingness in the scheme of things. It's natural to find such thoughts terrifying. To contemplate the massive indifference of the universe can feel as disorienting as being lost in a dense wood, or as frightening as falling overboard into the sea with no one to know we have gone.But there's another angle from which it's oddly consoling. You might think of it as cosmic insignificance therapy. The anxieties that clutter the average life, relationship troubles, status rivalries, money worries, shrink instantly down to irrelevance. So do pandemics and presidencies, for that matter. The cosmos carries on regardless, calm and imperturbable. Or to quote the title of a book I once reviewed, the universe doesn't give a flying fuck about you.To remember how little you matter on a cosmic time scale can feel like putting down a heavy burden that most of us didn't realize we were carrying in the first place. This sense of relief is worth examining a little more closely, though, because it draws attention to the fact that the rest of the time, most of us do go around thinking of ourselves as fairly central to the unfolding of the universe. If we didn't, it wouldn't be any relief to be reminded that in reality, this isn't the case.Nor is this a phenomenon confined to megalomaniacs or pathological narcissists, but something much more fundamental to being human. It's the understandable tendency to judge everything from the perspective you occupy, so that the few thousand weeks for which you happen to be around inevitably come to feel like the linchpin of history, to which all prior time was always leading up. These self-centered judgments are part of what psychologists call the egocentricity bias.And they make good sense from an evolutionary standpoint. If you had a more realistic sense of your own sheer irrelevance, considered on the timescale of the universe, you'd probably be less motivated to struggle to survive, and thereby to propagate your genes. But this overvaluing of your existence gives rise to an unrealistic definition of what it would mean to use your finite time well. It sets the bar much too high. It suggests that in order to count as having been well spent,Your life needs to involve deeply impressive accomplishments, or that it should have a lasting impact on future generations. This is the mindset of the Silicon Valley tycoon determined to put a dent in the universe, or the politician fixated on leaving a legacy, or the novelist who secretly thinks her work will count for nothing unless it reaches the heights and the public acclaim of Leo Tolstoy's. Less obviously, though, it's also the implicit outlook of those who glumly conclude that their life is ultimately meaningless,and that they'd better stop expecting it to feel otherwise. What they really mean is that they've adopted a standard of meaningfulness to which virtually nobody could ever measure up. It is implausible for almost all people to demand of themselves that they be a Michelangelo, or a Mozart, or an Einstein. There have only been a few dozen such people in the entire history of humanity. In other words, you almost certainly won't put a dent in the universe. Indeed, depending on the stringency of your criteria, even Steve Jobs, who coined that phrase, failed to leave such a dent. Perhaps the iPhone will be remembered for more generations than anything you and I will ever accomplish, but from a truly cosmic view, it will soon be forgotten, like everything else. No wonder it comes as relief to be reminded of your insignificance. It's the feeling of realizing that you've been holding yourself all this time to standards you couldn't reasonably be expected to meet. And this realization isn't merely calming, but liberating. Because once you're no longer burdened by such an unrealistic definition of a life well spent, you're free to consider the possibility that a far wider variety of things might qualify as meaningful ways to use your finite time. You're free, too, to consider the possibility that many of the things you're already doing with it are more meaningful than you'd suppose. It becomes possible to see that preparing nutritious meals for your children might matter as much as anything could ever matter, even if you won't be winning any cooking awards. Or that your novel's worth writing if it moves or entertains a handful of your contemporaries, even though you know you're no Tolstoy. Or that virtually any career might be a worthwhile way to spend a working life if it makes things slightly better for those it serves. Cosmic insignificance therapy is an invitation to face the truth about your irrelevance in the grand scheme of things, to embrace it. Truly doing justice to the astonishing gift of a few thousand weeks isn't a matter of resolving to do something remarkable with them. In fact, it entails precisely the opposite, refusing to hold them to an abstract and over-demanding standard of remarkableness, against which they can only ever be found wanting, and taking them instead on their own terms, dropping back down from godlike fantasies of cosmic significance into the experience of life as it concretely, finitely, and often enough, marvelously really is.